Welcome to Shaq's house. Shaq's house. That's our Shaq. You're now in Shaq's house.
Hey, what's up, Shaq Housers? How you doing? It's your boy, the one and only Shaq House. Yeah, I hope your week went good. I hope you're starting off to a great 2024. Today, as promised, I told you I'd be talking about all the Marvel mutant characters who are capable of producing electricity. That's right. We got Bevatron. We got the Shocker. We got Stinger. We're even going to throw in Storm in there for you, too. I know how y'all love Storm. I love Storm, too. So we're going to break these mutants down, do a compare and contrast, and check it out.
The Shocker. The Shocker has the mutant ability to generate large amounts of bioelectricity in his body, which he can then release as bolts of static energy from his hands or shape into intense force fields that cover wide areas as large as an aircraft hangar. His hands and feet have been naturally or cybernetically replaced with two-pronged pincer claws. Some fun facts. The first character to go by the codename Shocker was Herman Schultz, who's a well-known Spider-Man villain. But Randall Darby over here, he was a member of the Mutant Force, a mutant mercenary team originally formed by Magneto and later became the mutant terrorist group known as the Resistance. He was later part of Unus the Untouchable's gang in Genosha and lived inside the huge Magneto monument that had been created from the Sentinel's remains, the Sentinel that destroyed Genosha, mind you. He was depowered on M-Day, but later somehow had his powers restored, but he never made it to Krakoa. It's unknown if he actually went there and went through Crucible, who knows. Anyway, his clawed feet and hands, they look stupid and impractical. If they're part of his mutation, that sucks. But if he had them cybernetically replaced, that's even worse, because he looks like an electric lobster for Christ's sakes. Next, El Águila. El Águila's mutant power was to discharge powerful electrostatic charges generated by his own body through a conductive medium. His body generated and stored electricity emitted by his central nervous system and could then discharge the electricity after it had built up to a certain level. His body was capable of discharging a maximum of 100,000 volts, sufficient at 10 feet to kill a man or stun a rhinoceros even. When it reached its full charge, his body would naturally discharge any excess energy in minute, harmless quantities. He could mentally control the intensity of the energy that he produced, keeping it well within the non-lethal range. After fully depleting his store of bioelectricity, be it in one blast or successive blasts, it took him 1/2 hour to recharge back to his full strength. The maximum range at which his blast could propagate through the air at sea level is 30 feet. The major limitation of El Águila's bioelectric blast is that he had to be in direct contact with the conductive medium in order to release it. So accordingly, he carried a sword through which he could focus his power. Some fun facts. Alejandro Montoya is a Spaniard and an expert swordsman, both of which make me think of this.
Hello. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
He was a swashbuckling crime fighter in New York City and never got himself involved in mutant affairs. He was depowered on M-Day, but was last seen being in consideration as a recruit for Tony Stark's initiative during the Civil War storyline. Next, Stinger. The Stinger possesses the mutant power to bodily generate static electricity within her body cells. She can then release this electrical energy as lightning blasts of varying intensities through her fingertips. Some fun facts. Wendy Sherman is only the third character to go by the codename Stinger. The first Stinger was a 1940s criminal. Stinger number 2 was a mercenary who attacked the Avengers. Number 4 was a member of Genetics. And Stinger number 5 was a member of the Strike Force 1. Wendy Sherman, she was a reckless young valley girl who got recruited by Apocalypse somehow into his Alliance of Evil group who frequently fought the original X-Factor. Her final outing with the Alliance of Evil led to her incarceration, and she reappeared in publication nearly 20 years later, looking more punkish and heavily withdrawn and shy, aka she was emo. She never made it to Krakoa, but instead settled into suburban life with Paulie Provenzano, the invulnerable former X-Men known as Omerta, and had a child with him, and later adopted another one. Next, Bevatron. Bevatron's mutant ability was to increase the personal storage of bioelectricity within the cells of his body. He could then channel this energy into radiant discharges of high voltage energy from his hands in either energy-charged fists or blasts of electrical energy. Some fun facts. This overconfident young French mutant was added to Emma Frost's Hellions in the early 90s, and was subsequently one of the Hellions massacred by Fitzroy and his Sentinels. He was later resurrected on Krakoa. Because he's French, I often pronounce his codename as Bevatron. Next, Styglut. Styglut was a mutant with energy conversion powers. He possessed the ability to drain the life energy of others upon physical contact and store that energy within his body cells. His body would then metabolize the life energy, processing it into a form of bioelectricity, which he could then discharge as bolts from his hands or as a radiant discharge in all directions. Some fun facts. A native of Earth 1191 in an alternate timeline roughly 100 years from now, Styglut, what kind of a name is that? Styglut was one of the many mutant outlaws who escaped to the present due to Trevor Fitzroy's jailbreak in X-Men 287. He was the last outlaw that the mutant named Bishop had to capture and terminate, though he kept a low profile for about a few months. And in his first full appearance, he used some hookers to fuel his electrical powers before taking on Bishop, who subsequently killed him in battle in New York City. Next, Feedback. Feedback is a mutant capable of producing bioelectrical energy in various forms and absorbing outside forms of electromagnetic force directed at him in order to increase his energy reserves. He can radiate electrical surges from his skin or direct the energy out in blasts from his fingertips. Feedback can also produce tangible energy fields shaped from his electrical energy, which could be used for protection or made into animated shapes like a giant solid fist or even what he calls shock troopers. The shock troopers are humanoid masses of electricity with a full range of movement that can physically interact with objects, yet produce high voltage electricity, enough to stun or kill a man upon contact. These shock troopers are an inherent aspect of Feedback's powers and not a skill that he has cultivated. He subconsciously manifested them before his powers had even stabilized after their initial development and demonstrated no difficulty or need for concentration to direct their actions. Though they don't speak or demonstrate individual traits or thought, it's possible that the shock troopers are actually created with a semi-autonomous portion of Feedback's mind directing them, allowing them to maintain and operate more or less independently of Feedback's own active mind. Some fun facts. Albert Lewis was a young, up-and-coming Canadian professional. He had a good job, good friends, and a girlfriend on the way, right when his mutant powers manifested. And ever since then, he's been hunted as a mutant for most of his adult life and tried to escape this conflict. He joined Alpha Flight's training team, Gamma Flight, that's where he got his code name, but when Alpha Flight ended, he wanted out. He cloned himself and hid under a false name, got a new job, and got a wife and a daughter. But with the Krakoan age now ending thanks to Orchis, he was pulled back into the mutant conflict, just like Michael Corleone in The Godfather Part 3. Every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in. Next, Bolt. Bolt possesses the mutant power to absorb ambient charges of static electricity in his environment and from the atmosphere. Typically, Chris's body harmlessly expended this energy. However, he was able to store and release it for a variety of effects. He could produce electricity within its body and generate it outwards through his skin. He could create an electrified aura that distorted his facial features and shocked anyone who came into physical contact with him. Chris could also cause his electricity to be discharged from any area of his body, but normally directed it as blasts from his hands. He could channel electrical energy through conductive material and form protective shields generating electrical arcs. Bulk could also siphon energy from electricity-generating sources to empower himself. Chris was also extensively trained in armed and unarmed combat by Cable and was a skilled, albeit brutal, interrogator. After immersing himself in the persona and name of the mutant mercenary known as Maverick, Chris began wearing a suit of lightweight Kevlar body armor as well as a mask with atmospheric seals. Though he wielded a pair of conventional handguns, he favored using his powers to generate concussive electrical force blasts. Some fun facts. Chris Bradley was a high school freshman in upstate New York when his powers manifested, at which time the X-Men began checking him out. Well, actually, it looked more like stalking, if you ask me. And it eventually led to them approaching him and offering to help him control his powers. Around the same time, he found out that he had the legacy virus too. Double whammy. But his family was later targeted by the mutant-hating Friends of Humanity, causing them to go into witness protection. Chris later joined the superhero game and became part of the New Warriors as the superhero known as Bolt, and he was later trained by both Cable and Maverick, the latter whose identity he took on and was ironically killed by him when he became Agent Zero. Next, Surge. Surge possesses the mutant power to absorb and process electricity from her environment. She siphons ambient static electricity in the atmosphere and can also drain nearby electrical outlets or mechanical devices of power. This siphoning ability is uncontrollable and can be dangerous to herself and others when she builds a greater level of electrical energy than she can actually control. Therefore, she wears a set of stabilizer gauntlets which prevent her from draining energy unless she chooses to. Surge can redirect her electrical storage as lightning-like bolts from her hands or radiate arcs and flashes of electricity in all directions. She can also metabolize the electrical power in her system to boost her physical speed, increasing her speed and reaction time and allowing her to run at upwards of 500 to 600 miles per hour. Some fun facts. She's a Japanese mutant who was part of Xavier's school during the 2000s, being in both the New Mutants and the New X-Men titles. She looks cyberpunk because of those gloves and her power's electrical motif. Her power was so uncontrollable at one point that she couldn't even bathe. Jesus, it was like putting a hairdryer in bath water. Next, Alexander Lexington. Alexander Lexington has the mutant power to produce electrostatic energy. His high-voltage blasts could stun and electrocute living opponents, and the heat and electrical output that they produced could damage inanimate targets as well. By producing controlled levels of electricity, he could override and operate mechanical systems by remote control or force them to overload and explode due to a power surge. Some fun facts. Alexander Lexington was a soldier with a disciplinary record, and he kept his mutant powers hidden. For me personally, he was an Uncle Tom, since he later joined the Office of National Emergency's Sentinel Squad 1 program and was granted a Sentinel robot that he piloted. He was later killed by Sentinel nanotech in a touch of irony. Good riddance, traitor. Okay, what does the term bioelectric mean? Well, it can mean several different things, actually. But any form of energy that's produced by the human body is considered bioenergy. For example, Gambit's powers, they're biokinetic. Oya's powers are biothermal. Hell, the Invisible Woman, her powers could be considered biocosmic, and so forth. Bioelectric, therefore, can just refer to people with lightning or electricity powers. It behaves just like normal electricity, only it's being generated by a human body. For example, Electro, he could be called bioelectric, for instance, or storm channeling lightning bolts also qualifies. El Águila and the Stinger, they wield this form of bioelectricity as well. The second form of bioelectric energy is slightly different. You see, the human body naturally produces electricity. Electrical currents, they crackle between synapses in the brain, and it takes place elsewhere in the body as well. Now, some superhuman beings, they produce superhuman levels of bioelectricity, and they draw upon it as an enhanced natural byproduct of human physiology, rather than a completely separate paranormal function like the first group of bioelectric mutants that we discussed. But the difference is largely academic. However, characters like the Wasp and Spider-Woman, they tend to emphasize the bio portion of bioelectric, while characters like Storm or Electro, they emphasize the electric portion. The latter two, they will sense or interact with mechanically generated electricity, complete electrical circuits and power cords, etc. While the Wasp and Spider-Woman, their form of bioelectricity is also referred to as neuroelectric or electrochemical. They don't use their bioelectrics for mechanical or electronic purposes very often, but instead, they typically use their powers in ways that interfere with biochemistry in their opponents, for example, causing paralysis, stunning opponents, etc. Okay, what are the differences between the characters that we discussed? The Stinger, the Shocker, and Bevatron, they're essentially bioblasters. They shoot out concentrated beams of energy that just happen to be electricity. Alexander Lexington, he did the same, only he could apply his power to manipulating electrical systems. Styglut was similar, but he needed life energy to fuel his power. Águila, he created an electrical current, letting him shock objects upon contact. He could also channel his electrical power over a distance through conductive mediums, like metal. And he could create the bioblaster effect using a metal conductor, sending a charge of electrical energy racing through the medium and blasting out from the tip of his sword. Now, Chris Bradley, Bolt, he had the power to generate and manipulate electricity more fully. He could project an electrical bioblast, but he could also generate a static charge, electrifying his body and conducting into any conductive material nearby. He could not only generate electricity on his own, but he could also siphon it from outside sources as well. Surge was similar to Bolt in how she could use her powers, except for the super speed aspect, but she could not generate electricity on her own. She was completely dependent on siphoning from outside sources to absorb electrical energy, from ambient static electricity to the electrical power of machinery. Now, Storm manipulates atmospheric ionization. This induces a buildup of electrostatic activity between 2 points by giving them opposing polarities. She typically manipulates existing weather phenomena to create electrostatic buildup in clouds in relation to specific points of impact on the ground below, causing a lightning bolt to strike down out of the sky and connect the electrical arc between them. On rare occasions, Storm employs her own body as an electrical medium, causing an electrostatic buildup around her fingertips that makes it appear as if she's throwing lightning bolts from her body. But overall, of all these characters, I'd have to say that Feedback, he's the most powerful mutant generator of electrical energy. You see, his power, it involves electromagnetic force, and he uses that as fuel to power the bioelectrical energy that he generates. And he can turn his energies into high voltage energy blasts, he can shape electrical force fields, and he can even create those shock troopers, which are basically electric energy constructs operating as extensions of his own will. And he's able to absorb outside sources of electricity to boost and recharge his own abilities. Okay, Shackhousers, that's what I got for you this week. Tune in next week, we're going to be looking at all the mutant werewolves in Marvel. Tune in then, and I will see you next week, and you have a good one. Later!
Mansion, apartment.
Shack house. Yes!
Yeah.